Please join me in prayer. God of everlasting love, help us to see the good news of the empty tomb. Show us the word of life and love we have in this good news. Pour your love into our souls that we may know the Spirit that you have given us through this holy and this living word. And fill us, O God, that we may too run into the world with fear and with joy. Amen. Well, have you ever experienced an earthquake? As residents of the Midwest, earthquakes are a rare occurrence, and when they do occur, they aren't, if you'll pardon the pun, usually earth-shattering, which is a good thing. But I've actually experienced two in my lifetime. The first one when I was attending a baseball game at the old Detroit Tigers Stadium many, many years ago, and we were pretty high up in the cheap seats. The game had been delayed by rain, and finally the clouds broke, allowing the game to get underway. Well, it ended up being a blowout with the Tigers losing 10-0. I don't remember if it was the Indians or not. But it wasn't really very exciting, except for perhaps about just a few seconds about midway through the game, when all of a sudden it felt like the seats were swaying back and forth. Now, kids used to make the bleachers sway at my high school during football and basketball games, so I didn't really think it was that weird until I stopped to think, well, I'm actually sitting on this huge iron and concrete structure. But it was a sensation that only lasted just a few seconds, and my concern was over as quickly as the earthquake, and didn't really think about it again until I saw the report on the news that night about a tremor being reported in the area. And the second earthquake I experienced was just about as uneventful, and it happened right here in Northeast Ohio about 3 years ago. I was sitting here in my office at my desk at the church when all of a sudden I felt kind of dizzy. And it seemed like my vision blurred just for a second, but then before I could think about it, it was over. I mean, it felt to me like almost like one of those carnival fun houses you walk through and you're halfway through the hallway and all of a sudden it starts to go like this and then it stops. And at first I panicked a little thinking, well, maybe there's something wrong with me. Was I having a stroke or something? But then it was over before I could dwell on it. And so I got back to work, and again, I didn't think about it again until I was watching the news that night. And there had been an earthquake that registered about 4.0 on the Richter scale, centered near Youngstown in the area of the fracking wastewater injection well. Well, in our gospel lesson today from Matthew, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, who we never really find out who that is, went to the tomb where Jesus' body had been laid the night before. The women, part of the group of the disciples that had been living and traveling with Jesus, had been present the day before when Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man who had also been a disciple of Jesus, had taken his body from the Romans, wrapped it in fresh linens, and laid it in the tomb. And the women were right there when Joseph rolled a stone over the entrance, and then they left to go home to prepare for the Sabbath with the other disciples. Well, when the women left to go home that night, they thought their life with their teacher was over. They thought that life as they had known it was finished. So the next day after the Sabbath, as the two Marys approached the tomb, there was an earthquake. And maybe it was big enough to cause the stone in front of the tomb to roll out of the way, or maybe it was the result of the stone being moved away by the angel. I don't really know. But I'm thinking that when the earth shook, and maybe the guards at the tomb felt like I did, a little disoriented, a little unstable on their feet. And then when they saw someone dressed in brilliant white sitting on top of the stone that had been rolled back from the entrance, the scripture tells us that they became like dead men. I've never been to the Holy Land, but I've seen photographs of ancient tombs in the Middle East that have been built into the side of hills. And most of them seem to be located in pretty rocky terrain, either in natural caves or man-made caves that have been hewn out of the rock, out of the side of the hill. In some of the pictures, the stones I saw that were used to close off the tomb were huge round stones, kind of like a millstone, but much, much larger. And if you look close at those photos of those types of tombs with the rolling rock, there's usually a track or a groove in the ground in front of the entrance to guide the stone so that it can be rolled away from the entrance and then rolled back once the body's inside. And as I understand it, the tombs that have these rolling kind of stones are constructed such that it's much, much harder to open the tomb than it is to close it, since opening it usually means rolling the stone up a hill or up over some sort of indentation in the ground to keep the stone from rolling. Well, have you ever seen a fainting goat? I've seen a sign out in front of someone's house near here that sells them when I was out for a run. And fainting goats, as I understand it, actually pass out or faint when they're scared. Anyway, the guards who were standing watch over the tomb were scared to death by what they saw, and they felt big, strong soldiers overcome with awe at the sight and the sounds of the rock moving, overcome by what they thought was an angel dressed in white sitting there on top of the stone, so much so they were frightened that they became like dead men, fainting perhaps just like those goats. Well, I wondered as I read this, why were these big, strong men fainting dead away, and the women were not afraid? What kept them on their feet? Do not be afraid, the angel said to them. I know who you're looking for, but he's not here. He's raised from the dead. Come in and see for yourselves, and then go quickly and tell the other disciples what you found. Go and tell. It's the same message for us today. Go and tell. In the passage from Jeremiah, Israel had witnessed the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem along with the exile of all their leaders and their teachers. Everything that identified them as the people of God had been destroyed and taken from them. The people felt that they had been totally, utterly destroyed, that they had nothing left to live for, that they were finished. And yet Jeremiah was there, prophesying to them, filling them with hope. Jeremiah said to them, thus says the Lord, the people who survived the sword found grace in the wilderness. Grace in the wilderness. And Jeremiah reminded them of God's message. I have loved you with everlasting love, therefore I have continued my faithfulness to you. In spite of all the evidence to the contrary, Jeremiah assured them, God had not abandoned them. God still loved them. God still loves each and every one of us. Well, today is Easter Sunday, the day we as Christians celebrate the good news, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And over the course of the last week, we remembered and we recalled the events leading up to Jesus' death. It began with his triumphant entry into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey as crowds waved their palm branches, throwing their cloaks on the ground in front of him, crying out, Hosanna, save us, Hosanna in the highest, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then during the week, we walked with Jesus as he ate and he drank with his disciples, as he reminded them of all the things that he taught them. And we remembered how Jesus ate with them one last time, a last meal, a remembrance given to them to be given to us and to all future generations, a memory to recall anew Jesus' words and Jesus' actions. And we pondered the painful reality of how the disciples abandoned Jesus. And maybe we were reminded of the times that we've also abandoned Jesus, abandoned God out of fear, out of ignorance, or maybe out of arrogance. Then we finally revisited the scene of Jesus' devastation, seeing again how he was scourged and crucified upon the cross. We even stripped our sanctuary at the end of the service, stripped it of all the reminders of joy that we have being his followers, his disciples, symbolizing the loss that the first disciples must have felt. And we left the sanctuary on Thursday heavy with the pain, heavy with the loss of losing him, feeling finished perhaps. But the story isn't over. The Gospel of John tells us that when Mary went to the tomb on the morning after the Sabbath and saw that Jesus was not there, her immediate thought was that someone must have stolen the body. And as Peter and the beloved disciple ran to tell the others what was happening, Mary remained there at the tomb, feeling lost, weeping, believing that she had nothing left, that she was finished, that Jesus was finished. His body was gone. Can you feel the pain and the hopelessness that those women must have felt? And yet the angel tells them and tells us, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. The women heard the angel and they listened intently, and they were filled with great joy and great fear. Well, I remember the day my wife Laura and I were taking our daughter Mary home from the hospital. We didn't know if we would ever be able to have children, and yet here was this little creature in our arms as we walked out of the hospital. At that moment, I was filled with great joy and also great fear. Would I be a great father? Would I know what to do in every situation? Would I be able to teach her adequate skills to live and to love in the world? Would her life make a difference in the world? I was surprised by what had happened, and I felt great joy and great fear standing on the precipice of new life. In both the story from Jeremiah and from Matthew, the players are faced with unimaginable loss from which none of them could ever envision a future. And the women were told, do not be afraid. And the people of Israel were told, do not be afraid. I have loved you with everlasting love, God said to the people of Israel. God said to the women at the tomb, and God says to us, do not be afraid. I have loved you with everlasting love. Do not be afraid. And the women ran to tell the other disciples, filled with great joy, filled with great fear, perhaps understanding that they stood on the precipice of new and everlasting life. Well, there's no doubt that we live in a world filled with an overabundance of information. Instantly, it seems, we hear horrible things happening around the world and even in our own backyards. Media outlets just stoke the fires by sensationalizing events in the name of ratings and profits, and it can seem overwhelming as we're inundated with the sights and the sounds of the brokenness of humanity. I don't think it helps much when there are far too many people, preachers included, who seem to relish in pointing out all the bad things in the world, making it seem like we're in the middle of an epic battle between the forces of good and evil, a battle in which they would lead us to believe that evil has the upper hand, that Satan is in control. When I hear people talking like that, it makes me shake my head in shame. And is it no wonder that we sometimes feel that we are lost, that we're finished? But that's not the end of the story, my friends, because today is Easter Sunday, the day we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, a hope beyond hope in the midst of what seems to be utter and complete loss. Because you see, Easter is not simply about the resuscitation of a corpse. It's about the everlasting love of God who has loved us from the beginning, who still loves us, and who will continue to love us. Human power, human hierarchies are not inevitable, and they are not unchangeable. Death does not have the final word. Despair does not win. My friends, we stand at the precipice of new life and everlasting love. Christ is risen. Do not be afraid. As we are reminded in the letter to the Colossians, as disciples of Christ, we are resurrected with him. We are made new in and through our connection to Jesus, the one who sits at the right hand of God. So don't dwell on the things and the people of this earth that cloud your vision, but rather hold fast to the love of God, love that is everlasting, love that is persistent, love that is apparent in the resurrection of the one who died at the hands of those who held earthly power. Remember, it is in and through our baptism that we have died to our old lives. It is in and through our baptism that we are now hidden with Christ in God. We are all, each and every one of us are all an integral part of God's doings in the world. God is active in the world through us. We stand at the precipice of new life and everlasting love, called by God to live a resurrection life, alive and shining with God's being. So when the earth seems to shake around your feet, set your minds on heavenly things and live life with the knowledge that whatever we face, we do not face alone. And remember that you are loved no matter who you are and no matter where you are on life's journey, because Christ is risen. Do not be afraid. Death does not have the final word. God does. So go and tell the world. We all stand at the precipice of new life. We all stand in God's everlasting love. Do not be afraid. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Thanks be to God. Amen.